Hi, I'm Myles, pretentious director named Aidan Myles Green. This is what's going to turn out to be probably the worst episode of MovieShmoovie, my movie review show. Let's do it. So this is the broke down quarantine edition, where my only decorations are not yet mounted Girl with the Dragon Tattoo poster, not yet mounted, was that Heat or Point Break? Point Break poster. Yeah, so we don't have a permanent setup yet because the world's ending. But once we do, it's gonna look. I'm Myles. I am 25 years old. I went to film school at UT, alma mater of, I was gonna say greats, but I don't think every single one of these is great. So I'm just gonna say alma mater of Richard Linklater, Wes Anderson, Owen Wilson, Robert Rodriguez. So I went to film school. I went out to LA for a semester at the very end of film school, and I didn't want to make coffee and sort mail anymore. So I came back to Dallas, Texas, and started a filmmaking career of my own. I've directed several nationwide promotional spots, commercials, internal videos for companies, music videos that have garnered statewide attention. I say all this because I'm a douchebag. No, I say all this because some bona fides here. I think one of the initial defenses of an artist when their art is criticized is that the critic is just a critic. Basically the entire plot of Ratatouille, that the critic is a miserable asshole and doesn't understand what went into the production of a given production. But I think that being a lifelong cinephile, a filmmaker myself, and a filmmaker that works largely in the commercial realm helps me to kind of, I don't know, I really dig the synergy of art house or just cinema with integrity and mass appeal. So, being the COVID quarantine edition of MovieShmoovie, we can't really talk about any theatrical releases right now. This is technically supposed to be a weekly movie review show wherein we talk about new releases, recommendations for you to go see or not see. Basically a one-man Roger Ebert. Roger Ebert is already one man. Fuck me. But being as it is lockdown time, I can't really review The Way Back with Ben Affleck and tell you to go see it because nothing is in theaters right now. So, that being the case, it's a good opportunity to talk about older movies, back catalog stuff that you can maybe find on Netflix or on YouTube and rent and check out, things that you might have missed or intentionally skipped that actually have some value and that are good, and that basically the only appropriate time to watch them would be when you don't have shit else to do. I'm gonna use these first few episodes to talk about kind of lower consequence movies, just because if I'm gonna do a video on Heat or Point Break or The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo or Waves or something that's already been out that's viewable, I just feel that deserves my full production setup. So today we're gonna do what Michael Mann did in 2014 and kind of half-ass this thing and talk about Blackhat. Not Blackhat, the big-titted Spider-Man frenemy. This is Blackhat with a long-haired Chris Hemsworth at 10% body fat, weighing 250 pounds, but he's a computer hacker, guys. No, in all seriousness, this film was released in January 2015 I remember it getting negative reviews. I mean, there's a new Michael Mann film in theaters. I'm of age to see it, and I opted not to see it. So looking back, I must have been seeing some pretty lame stuff to just not want to see a Michael Mann film theatrically. $70 million budget, less than $20 million box office gross. It doesn't look like it cost $70 million too. We'll get into that. So the other night I had a few and was rummaging around on YouTube. I've been on a Michael Mann kick lately. I started listening to a great podcast called The Rewatchables. Bill Simmons, the NBA guy, started it, and they have a great episode on Heat. It's like an hour and a half long. Heat being the greatest heist movie, probably the greatest crime film of all time. And you are gonna get a half-hour episode. I'm gonna half-hour episode you guys so good about Heat. Rummaging around on YouTube, watching movie clip scenes, I stopped myself after about 3 or 4 because I distinctly was like, this is kind of fucking good. So I spent $4 to rent the thing, had it for 48 hours, and watched it 3 times. Blackhat is kind of fucking awesome. I have to be stealing this phrase from someone else who's more original than me, but I'm gonna say it's an amazing bad movie. It's one of the best bad movies I've ever seen. And I can't even really put my finger on what's wrong with it. Chris Stuckman, a YouTuber who I really admire, he and a lot of other critics kind of pinpoint the script as being not only weak, but like ungodly bad, I think is what Chris Stuckman said. I don't think so. Michael Mann has a really good way of digging into the minutia of Michael Mann has a really good way of digging into the minutia, the really pedestrian kind of details of a crime story. And that's what makes it feel realistic. It's hard to explain, but like in Heat, for instance, when you're watching characters get frustrated and answer phones and look over paperwork and do a bunch of administrative work. Just the right amount of that stuff and the right amount of cop jargon, law enforcement jargon, things that go totally over your head as a layperson, but you can tell that he researched. That really helps with immersion and believability and ultimately tension in a story that focuses around crime. And that casts an umbrella over the whole movie, wherein movie things like an action scene, like a shootout, like a fight scene, start feeling really real when all the details around it are propping it up as a real thing. So you're like, oh shit, this is actually happening, because they are going through the boring administrative law enforcement steps to catch this guy as they would in real life. So Blackhat is about a computer hacker named Hathaway, played by Chris Hemsworth, who I was talking with my buddy before shooting, probably absorbed the bulk of the budget of this film for his salary. That happens when you do 2 Thor movies and an Avengers film and have another Avengers film coming out later in the year this movie comes out, because this movie doesn't look like a $70 million movie. But that's not to say it looks bad, because Michael Mann fucking directed it. If you don't know who Michael Mann is, he is probably the greatest director of crime films ever. He's great, and this film was kind of framed upon its release as one of the dying whimpers, you know, of his filmography, one of the late era albums of his career, basically, if he was a band. It was just, it's a dumped in January hacker movie, didn't have a lot of advertising. Yeah. First, for the positives, or the pros of the movie. I don't really care to get into the plot, because Michael Mann didn't. I used to have a really kind of snooty opinion of Michael Mann's modern era digital video work, especially since he was one of the earliest adopters of filming on digital instead of on film. And you can really tell on films like Miami Vice, Collateral. Collateral looks a little more cinematic, but Miami Vice is a big one. Public Enemies looks like it was shot on a camcorder. And Blackhat as well. It has an intentionally digital aesthetic. But it's weird, watching Blackhat, I was finally able to appreciate what Michael Mann was going for in that. David Fincher being my favorite director, I'm a big fan of perfectionism and perfect, you know, panic room, locked off, exacting shots. I didn't realize that by intentionally making his films look kind of, not slapshot, but gritty and just, you know, you're in it, that really does add to the mood. And Michael Mann is still able to do some beautiful things with his cinematography that are like trademark Michael Mann, beautiful, but also a new kind of modern look for him. Likewise, another amazing aspect about this film is the violence. I'm not even saying that to be like sadistic or funny. The violence kind of ties in with the police procedural stuff I was talking about earlier, which is there's a way to do violence that instead of, you know, playing it up, you play it down and you make it seem kind of not boring, but quick and underwhelming and really sudden and violent, the way violence is in normal life. Like fist fights are scary to watch, gunshots are scary to hear. There's obviously the famous shootout scene in Heat, wherein Michael Mann used the actual production track for the guns because he liked how scary the echoes sounded in the skyscrapers of Los Angeles, and they sounded real. Likewise in Blackhat, there are some incredible sequences of action, not only violence, but action. I was surprised at the action in this film, where all the elements I've already mentioned, the sound design, the way the camera moves, the way the characters move, how quickly things happen and how long things are drawn out, just does a great job of making you feel like this is real and dangerous and just feels different than your average shootout. You could give this exact script to any other director and they might do a better job with the character work. They might punch up some of the character moments, but I can guarantee you they wouldn't have directed any of these shootouts or, surprisingly, the hand-to-hand sequences as well as Michael Mann has. It didn't seem out of place that Chris Hemsworth was able to clear a room of like 5 or 6 thugs with his bare hands and the tools around him. It's bolstered by the sound design, it's bolstered by the camera work, and yeah. For as many insults as were hurled at the script, it was surprisingly dense and detail and plot heavy, in my opinion. I was invested in catching the villain only because I hadn't seen many films, or any films really, where it starts with cybercrime and it brings it into real life. And not only it brings it into real life, but who you find out is ultimately committing these cybercrimes, he's not gonna have a fist fight on the top of a building with Chris Hemsworth. It's, you know, it's over pretty quickly because he's going up against Chris Hemsworth. But he's prepared in other ways. And it was just really impressive to see a director, especially an aging director like Michael Mann, still really dedicated to clinging on to the technical accuracy of a lot of these details and of the world he's building. Is the red light still blinking? I don't want to do this because Michael Mann's my boy, but let's get into some negatives or cons in the film. There is a romance, and it's a little arch. I'm torn on this one because it does feel like a mandatory romance for the sake of a mandatory romance, the way most Hollywood, you know, mid to big budget movies have. But when it starts, it won me over in how it was conveyed. Again, Michael Mann, nighttime urban shooting with, you know, anamorphic bokehs in the background and focus being shallow and coming in and out. There's this gorgeous scene of Chris Hemsworth just kind of looking at the female lead in the cab, and you can tell exactly what's going through his mind. He's looking at her neck, the curves of her neck, notices kind of her elbows, her knees, and just by doing that, with any trite romantic dialogue, you understand that, oh, he has a crush now, and he's a human, he has a crush, and you know, they start bonding because they're going through a lot of traumatic experiences together. She's not the best. There is a language barrier, a distinct language barrier with her character. There are these weird CGI sequences, and I wouldn't spoil this for you unless it was more of a warning, a hang in there, if you will. The movie would go up an entire letter grade and a half for me if these sequences weren't in there. They're hard to explain. They're almost late 90s era Fincher with Fight Club and Panic Room, how he would do those full CG, perfect computer animated shots of environments as a stylistic thing. But they looked relatively photoreal and they served a purpose. For instance, in Panic Room, the famous shot setting up the space of the house and showing you where you are. In Fight Club, as satire, kind of, showing all these brands and zooming through this galaxy only to find out it's a fucking trash can. In this, I mean, they could have been slapped on in post. I'm not even sure they were planned. They're awful. They're fucking awful. They're really bad. Not only does the CGI look horrible, the sound is mixed way too high in the mix. Like, I had to turn my computer down and then up for the next scene. And I have a 2020 MacBook. Yeah. Likewise, they last forever. They're largely relegated to the first 30 minutes of the film. So that's why I'm warning you about these, because you're gonna see them, they're gonna piss you off because there are like 4 in the first half hour of the film. And even I was getting a little annoyed. But they stop, which is another reason they feel really random, is because the last 2/3 of the film don't have that. They stop and the movie picks up. But yeah, these CGI sequences are kind of pointless. I mean, they're not pointless. They occur anytime the villain is doing a cybercrime, he's hacking, but we understand we're not dummies and we don't have to be spoon-fed wireframes and mainframes and electrons fine. It's fucking dumb. Last thing, and I don't want to sound like I'm contradicting myself. I talked earlier about how incredible the sound design reliably is in Michael Mann films, but occasionally you'll have some weirdness going on. For instance, in Heat, there's the scene where Al Pacino goes into the nightclub and meets up with Tone Loc, and the Cypress Hill track, Jump Around, that's playing, gets quiet to the point of like ridiculousness as they're basically whispering in this booth. Just as in Heat, where there's a club scene that the ambient sound effects are way too quiet, in Blackhat, for all its technical proficiency and accuracy, there is a lot of characters hitting keys, opening windows, Xing out of windows, and the movie's sound mix is force-feeding you these dummy, hey, we think you're dumb, we think you need to hear an electronic chirp or an electronic click or beep every time a character does something on a computer. And that's just not how computers are. When you X out of Chrome or Safari, it doesn't make a sound, it just happens. And despite Blackhat being praised by real-life hackers and intelligence operatives for its realism and a lot of its hacking, I was surprised that one of the things it got wrong, especially considering the sound mixing being great in the rest of the film, was this, which is kind of at the heart of the movie, is the sounds that it makes when people are doing things they're doing, which is hacking. So yeah, that was the first terrible episode of MovieShmoovie. Quarantine edition. I did the best I could with the posters in the background before the studio set up. And watch Blackhat. It's great, and you'll be surprised at how great it is. Even if a lot of the shit I said was gibberish, you don't know who Michael Mann is, you don't care. If you're a man over 25, you've probably seen Heat though, right? But yeah, even if you don't know or care, I really think you'll be surprised. Chris Hemsworth is in rare form, being a really dark, brooding, silent character who's getting shit done. Beautifully shot, great sound, with those exceptions I noted. And yeah, just didn't deserve to get lambasted the way it did. It's one of those movies where if you ran up to Michael Mann on the street, you would want to, like, or at least I would, want to give him a hug and be like, hey, I liked Blackhat. It was good to me.